I'm going to pick up on some themes that have already emerged in this fascinating prelude and fugue that's evolved this morning and shed perhaps a different light on some of the ways in which we might think about where we move next and where we have been. The science goal for EarthScope, as stated in 2001, as you've heard a number of times this morning, was broad and simple. It was to understand the structure, dynamics, the evolution of the North American continent. The facility goal, as included in the original EarthScope MREFC proposal 10 years ago, was challenging. And for the record, I think it's important to realize that all the goals set out in this ambitious plan 10 years ago have been achieved and in most cases exceeded. Virtually all of the observational systems have been installed and they are operating and providing data of exceptional quality. And for the record, this has been accomplished on time and within budget. This has only been possible through the hard work and by talented and dedicated teams at both IRIS and UNAVCO, and to them we express our thanks, and of them we can be rightly proud. Underlying this facility success, as has been mentioned a number of times already this morning, lies almost 2 decades of hard work by engaged consortia, their leadership, and a broad and committed community. You have defined and refined the science goals, tracked the implementation and the quality of the facility, exercised the data, and you're already producing exciting, unprecedented, and in many cases unanticipated new discoveries. Again, for the record, supporting this effort has been a sustained commitment of funding from NSF, and NSF, in spite of significant budget tensions over the past decade, has remained close to the budget plan that was originally laid out in 2003 for the EarthScope facility. One of the questions that arose early in the development of both IRIS and EarthScope was how can or should we emulate the very visible and successful physics and astronomy communities in the ways in which they organize and plan their science? How do they interact as a community and with NSF in setting priorities to advance their fields? We asked, can we be as successful as physics and astronomy have been in developing and prioritizing decadal plans, building budgets, and establish large experimental facilities? Outside NSF, similar questions can be asked about other fields such as the NIH support for molecular biology and the community culture that surrounds the Human Genome Project, or the ways in which NASA organizes around its planetary missions. With EarthScope, there may be ways in which we can view the earth sciences as finally having entered the realm of big science. Certainly, for better or for worse, EarthScope is now being characterized within NSF as a large facility. Maybe we should look at EarthScope as an example of success in emulating those big science communities. But, however, as IRIS and EarthScope have evolved, it's become apparent, to me at least, that there are some important and exciting differences at very fundamental levels in the ways in which we in the geosciences approach scientific observation and research. As we celebrate the success of EarthScope and look to the future and seek to improve, there is perhaps value in reflecting on and even celebrating these differences. In EarthScope, we've created a facility that is fundamentally different from many of the other large facilities developed and supported by NSF. As Duncan's already pointed out, many of the other large MREFC facilities that NSF has funded, like LAGO, ALMA, IceCube, LHC, they're designed and proposed by a defined team of research PIs to carry out a specific experiment. They follow the classic scientific method of hypothesis testing. An hypothesis is created, an experiment's designed to test that hypothesis, and a specialized experimental facility is built, often with a price tag in the case of many of these experiments, of billions of dollars, often highly leveraged and with outside funding and influence to carry out a specific experiment. As focused, hypothesis-driven experiments, rather than multi-user facilities, these large projects come with a strong hierarchical top-down leadership and organizational structure. They tend to have strong PI team that carries considerable weight in defining not only the design of the facility, but the scientific programs, the publications, the management, the outreach, etc. With this top-down and experiment-specific project focus, the data culture tends to be proprietary and closed, with strong controls on who has access to the data and the direction of how they are used. Publications, both those related to the facility and the science, are often prescribed in authorship and content. There's a central structure closely linked to the PI team that shepherds the scientific, observational, and outreach programs. Although not always in practice, these facility constructs are intended to be experiment-specific and time-limited. The facility is built, the hypothesis is tested, the particle, the neutrino, the gravity wave is observed or not, as the case may be. The facility is disbanded and the next experiment on the decadal plan is put forward. In EarthScope, as with much of the science supported by NSF Geosciences, we've created something that is very different. In many ways, EarthScope represents an earth or geoscience approach to large-scale research that at its cultural core is fundamentally different from the way science is organized in other branches of the physical sciences. Not only is the EarthScope facility spatially distributed, but the science research that it supports is open and broadly distributed in discipline, institution, and individual. There's much more organic, opportunistic, and discovery-based component in earth science research. The breadth of the research is wider. Many of the experiments were not explicitly planned in the development phase. Some of the results are quite unanticipated. There's certainly room in this structure for traditional hypothesis testing science, but it tends to emerge as an extension of, rather than the driver of, the observational discovery component. In EarthScope, a carefully crafted facility, broad-based by design, is at the core. Our culture of open data and the open range of PI research that support that NSF provides means that the facility can provide a framework on which a wide variety of science can grow and in which a broad international community of scientists can participate. Now, these contrasts in structure and culture for facilities and research are not simply an interesting philosophical debate. There are very practical implications. Over its 60-year history, large parts of NSF's portfolio and budget have been dominated by these large experiments in particle physics and astronomy. At the highest levels, the National Science Board, within the Director's Office, in NSF's collaboration with other agencies, and in its interactions with Congress, and even in its business and management structures, NSF has become quite comfortable in understanding the culture and type of experiments that dominate these physics and astronomy experiments. Major decisions about facility management are now being made at the upper levels of NSF that will certainly influence the future of geoscience facilities like EarthScope and perhaps our next big thing. It will be important for the community, you and your consortia like IRIS and UNAVCO, to work with the Earth Sciences Division at NSF to carefully monitor these developments in facility management over the next 5 years as we move towards what NSF is calling recompetition for these facilities. But I think of more fundamental importance is the challenge to us as a community to internally consider and better articulate the important and exciting foundations of this culture for our science. This meeting, and especially the sessions that look to the future, provide an appropriate opportunity to undertake these discussions. This meeting will end with a discussion of the next big thing. With the success of EarthScope, it's appropriate that we consider how things that EarthScope created might be sustained and expanded. Broadening the engagement to other disciplines within our own science I see as essential. Taking what we've learned and extending it to a collaborative international effort is one area that I personally think has considerable merit. Maybe there's something completely new that we want to define as the next big thing. But as we consider embarking on perhaps building another big thing, I encourage us as a community to also reflect on the big picture. We need to review the significant discoveries that have already emerged from EarthScope and explore ways to synthesize and build on them at a very fundamental level. NSF and we, after all, have not invested in EarthScope simply as a collection of first-class observational systems. As excellent, effective, and successful as those systems have been, the final measure of the success of EarthScope lies not in metrics of cost or observational performance, but in fundamental and, using NSF's phrase, even transformational new discoveries. As we spend the next 3 days in plenary sessions, in breakout groups, and in hallway discussions, here are a few themes that we might use to guide our thinking, especially in the long term. Let's demonstrate the success and impact, explore ways to synthesize and consolidate the discoveries of EarthScope, build on the framework that Basil provided for extending the interdisciplinary aspects of what EarthScope has done to, as he point out, that the sum is greater than the parts. Can we find new ways to develop and demonstrate the integrated cross-disciplinary science that's emerged from EarthScope? Let's celebrate the differences. I think, and I stress, that it's fundamental that we articulate to NSF the pride that we have in our scientific culture and the differences perhaps between it and some of the other traditional branches of science that NSF has supported. And let's build on our strengths and work with NSF to provide the public, the science community, and the international community with visibility to EAR, to NSF, and to EarthScope. And especially, I think, has emerged in what Megan was presenting, I think we have to realize that one of our strengths, one of the areas that we can certainly use looking forward, is to build on the relevance of the earth sciences. I look forward to the discussions. I think this is a very key time for EarthScope, for NSF, for the earth sciences as we move forward. I think we have an enormous success in EarthScope to build on. I think we have to, as a community, begin to focus on that question of returning back to the goal. What have we learned about the structure, evolution, deformation of the North American continent, and how can we apply that and develop that into an underlying transformational scientific ideas? Thank you.